It's Monday here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo, who's still in Denver, by the way, going to talk to you about this Steelers 13-6 win on the road. Is the offense always going to be like this? Is Justin Fields doing enough? We'll talk about all of that, Broderick Jones, his penalties, and the defense, all here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter. He's Ray Fittipaldo, who's still in Denver, by the way, after the Steelers 13-6 win over the Denver Broncos. We're going to break all of that down here in a couple of seconds here. But as always, I want to remind you this show can be found on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Now, Ray, the Steelers found a way to win 13-6. The defense did it again. The offense is doing just enough to get by, and I think that's been the message the first 2 weeks absolutely here. Before we get into the penalties and Broderick Jones and this, that, and the third, I want to ask you your thoughts right now about how Justin Fields is handling the situation. He got his second start, and as Jerry reported earlier earlier in the week, he did point out that the Steelers expect him to start the next game against the Chargers as well. Where is Justin Fields in your mind, Ray?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I thought Justin Fields in the first half was fine, Chris. I mean, you look at the yardage they put up. He punches one in the end zone with that nice touchdown pass to Darnell Washington. But then the second half was kind of ugly, right? Yeah. I mean, it went back to what they were, for much of last season. So, the funny thing is I look at the stat sheet after the game, and it's not impressive. He had like 13 completions all game. I think for like $117. But you look at two things, Chris. Number one, again, no turnovers. Most underrated stat so far this season. The Steelers are +5 in the turnover margin, and if you stay right there, you're going to win a lot of football games. Number two, and I don't know how it turned out this way, his quarterback rating, even after the second half, Chris, it was right around 100. I think it was like 97.4. So he's doing the things that you need to do to win football games. I don't know how much longer it can last when you get like 62 yards in the third and fourth quarter. That's not going to get it done for most weeks. But listen, Denver's a terrible football team. They did what they had to do to win. Now you move on to the Chargers and see if you can get the offense to play a little bit better.
The offense has to play better. You can't win with 18 points and 13 points. That's not going to win you football games. I think you're averaging 15.5 points in your first two games. I mean, that's Matt Canada levels of production there. Now, granted, how they're getting there is very different. They're still moving the ball. Their third down percentage was significantly lower this game than it was last game, but they're still moving the ball. Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren both averaged over 4 yards per carry. They were able to get things going. And let's also acknowledge this too. I think Justin Fields had some plays that he made that were taken away from him by things that were out of his control. There, he had a 51-yard strike of a bomb to George Pickens on the run that looked indefensible. And it was like, when you see a pass like that, you're like, whoa, he had a touchdown taken off of him in this game that could have made this, instead of 13-6, 17-6. So you take a 51-yard bomb that would have put them in range for at least a field goal and the touchdown. I mean, you're talking at least another total 7 points. I mean, you're talking about 26 when and whereas 20 points don't, bring home the bacon all the time. I think everyone's talking a lot differently about this offense if even those couple of things could bounce the Steelers' way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the penalties in this game were kind of ridiculous on both sides, Chris. 19 penalties for 202 yards. The Steelers had 10 for 78 yards, and I want to say the vast majority of them came on offense. I know Broderick Jones had 2. We're going to get into Broderick in the second segment, but Dan Moore had 1. You had the OPI on Van Jefferson that negated George Pickens' touchdown. So it was just a sloppy game, by both teams. for the Steelers, if you can just clean that up a little bit, you're never going to go penalty free. But
Right.
if you cut that down to 4 or 5 penalties for 40 or 50 yards, then you're right. Maybe instead of scoring 13, maybe you're up around 20 or 24, 27 points per game. So, or in this game. So definitely a lot of work to do for this offense. I still think Mike Tomlin is kind of pulling the strings behind Arthur Smith. I just think I cannot imagine that Arthur Smith wants to be this conservative. But again, they're doing things that they need to do to win these specific football games. But as I said earlier, I think that's about to change with the Chargers coming to town. They're coming off a big win at Carolina. They're 2-0. They're averaging 24 points per game. It's not going to be that easy against the Chargers at home at Acrisure on Sunday.
I understood the 18 points against the Falcons and the avoiding the middle part of the field and all of that, because that was a team that they should have beaten. You avoided the safeties like that. All of that added up to me. This was a defense that if you avoided Pat Surtain, I felt like you should have been able to put more points on the board against, and they didn't. And granted, we'll get to the penalties in the next segment with Broderick Jones and some of the things there. But at the end of the day, you still need to find a way to put up points, because there's going to be a day where a ball doesn't bounce your way and you do have a turnover. And it might be a situation where you weren't careless with the football. Another team just made a really great play, or just a bad luck moment just happened against you. And nothing about this Steelers offense so far suggests that they can get over even that. The one thing the Steelers offense has shown the ability to be able to do is to do just enough to let the defense be the unit that wins the football game. And listen, that's part of what this team was built on. Like, they're the way the roster is constructed, the way the salary cap's set up for this team, and how much they're paying in on defense. That's the specialty of this team. But if this team is going to be a real contender down the stretch at any point, they need this offense to get to scoring 24, 27 points to win some of those games against better teams, and those days are coming very soon.
Yeah, and how do you do that? The running game was there again, Chris. 141 yards on the ground. And I feel like we're beating a dead horse with this, but the Steelers have a receiving problem. George Pickens led all of their receivers today with 2 catches for 29 yards. I think Pat Freiermuth led the team, and he only had like 3 for 34. It's downright pathetic, what those receivers and tight ends do in the passing game. So we knew it was an issue going back to the spring. They never really addressed it. They're counting on journeymen like Van Jefferson and Scotty Miller, to pitch in. Calvin Austin. At least Austin had 1 first down catch today, if you're looking for positives, but it's not nearly good enough. And, Chris, you would think with the way they've run the ball the first 2 games that there would be more open receivers in the play action passing game. But, it's just not there right now. They're kind of, shooting themselves in the foot with the penalties, and, the open passing windows for Justin Fields. They're not producing much, many points or much yardage at all.
And that's something that, you're at the game, you can see it. I can't see on TV. I'm staying here in Pittsburgh. I covered the backyard brawl on Saturday. I can't see if guys are running open and Justin Fields isn't seeing them. And when we get the all-22, we're going to get a good look at that and be able to determine what's really going on here. But it feels so funny we're talking about this like the Steelers lost, right? It's like, well, they didn't do this, they didn't do that. But at the same time, it's also acknowledgement hey, you only got a few more of those this year where you're going to be able to play like this. I don't even think you're going to play like this against the Chargers. I think they're another team. They're going to play this way too, and they're going to be probably better at it because Justin Herbert's pretty good. Yeah. So eventually you're going to run into teams like that are going to force the issue and make you have to play better on offense. And I think the perpetual question that everyone's waiting to see, when will that time come?
Yeah, that's a great question. It doesn't seem like it's around the corner, does it?
It does not.
Just watching from the press box, it's hard to put a ton of blame on Justin Fields. But I will tell you, early in the game again, if you think back to, I think it was the first drive, he threw behind Najee Harris in the flat. On that same play, Pat Freiermuth was wide open over the middle. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you he was missing wide open receivers throughout the game because, pass protection was an issue at times. They gave up a couple of sacks, but they just seem to be off early in games, and I don't think they ever get into a rhythm with the passing. So, maybe Arthur Smith has to dial up some easy stuff for Fields early in these games, maybe screens, maybe shorter passes, develop some other concepts to maybe get him some more confidence, because right now it just seems like there's slow starters, and with the passing game at least, it doesn't really improve over the course of the game either.
It does not. And I think that's the problem the Steelers are running into right now, is they need something to improve to be able to move the ball down the field and to, again, balance this team and make them a credible threat against better opponents. And again, those days are coming soon. They got the Chargers this week and then the Cowboys the week after, I believe. So it gets a little bit harder in the coming weeks. We'll talk about other big aspects of this game. I want to talk to Ray about Broderick Jones, because not only his penalties, him getting benched, but also his response in the locker room. We'll talk about that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by SmartSide.
Between beauty and durability, making your neighbors jealous has never been easier. Introducing LP SmartSide Expert Finish Trim and Siding, now in brushed smooth texture. Available in 16 versatile colors, LP SmartSide Expert Finish products help create timeless designs and beautiful, longer-lasting dream homes. That's the beauty of brushed smooth.
Back here in the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's get into Broderick Jones. So initially we know Troy Fautanu is going to start in this game, and then we get the sense both of them are going to play in this game, but not at different positions. They're going to be rotating, and Steelers go out there, they rotate in Broderick Jones, and he gets in there, and in a span of 6 plays, he has 3 penalties, 1 false start, 2 holding calls. What's crazy is the first holding call wiped away good down and distance the Steelers had. Then the Steelers were, I think, in second and long. And then Justin Fields uncorks that 51-yard bomb to George Pickens, by the way, that we were talking about earlier. And then that's called back for another Broderick Jones hold. And it was at that point you see Troy Fautanu get sent on the field, Broderick Jones told to come off, and that ended his day. And Ray, after the game, he had some interesting comments about it. One, he was obviously upset at the calls, but also upset at himself for being in that situation. What's your read on how Broderick Jones played and how he reacted to it after the game?
Yeah, I mean, listen, obviously a disastrous series for him. It doesn't happen every day in the NFL where offensive linemen are pulled mid-series like you saw. I mean, that's an embarrassing thing for Broderick Jones to go through. I can remember the Steelers did, I think it was 2010, Chris. They had a tackle by the name of Jonathan Scott, who just had a ton of issues, most of them in pass protection. And I remember back then, Sean Kugler, the offensive line coach, actually pulled Scott mid-series. Now, the Steelers didn't have many options back then. Scott eventually got back into the lineup and had to play. But, I think the point of this is the Steelers have options now. I mean, they are blessed to have 2 other tackles in Troy Fautanu and Dan Moore, who are very solid NFL tackles. Dan Moore, maybe surprisingly, based on his past, but he's played well through the first 2 weeks. And Troy Fautanu, we talked about him all summer. I think the best thing about his performance today was you didn't notice him. And I thought, no penalties, no pressures, anything like that. So obviously a tough time for Broderick Jones. I still think he's the left tackle of the future. But, I mean, Chris, watching that performance today and really watching – you were out there in Latrobe with me, watching training camp all summer, I don't think Dan Moore is going to lose his job anytime soon to Broderick Jones. I think Broderick Jones has some stuff to work on. And until he gets right, the Steelers aren't just going to throw him back in there because he's a number 14 overall pick. You got to perform on the field. And right now, Dan Moore and Troy Fautanu are clearly outperforming him.
The Steelers certainly aren't going to hand things over just because of pedigree. They want to see results. They want to, base their decisions off of that, and that's the smart way to go. But I think it goes back to what everyone's wondering: is Broderick Jones being mishandled by this coaching staff by keeping him on the right and not letting him go to the left? And then you see all these problems developing, and now all these questions are happening, and everyone's wondering what's gonna become of the first round pick that was supposed to be the huge part of the future of the Steelers offensive line. And look, I think Zach Frazier had a solid game as well. I think Troy Fautanu had a solid game. Now Broderick Jones just needs to have solid games. Then you have the trio of the future that you want to build as pillars for this offensive line. And I think it's just interesting that it's getting in the way. And to your point, Dan Moore Jr., yeah, I think he was very polished in training camp. And then he was also, I thought he was, I have to admit, I think there were some pressures he gave up in this game that were pretty rough, but he was better in week 1 than I think I had seen him in most games in his career. And so, yeah, it's not going to be easy for Broderick Jones to just jump back into the Steelers starting lineup with their offensive line right now, the way that it is. But I think it's going to be a big question moving forward. Just how do they try to keep his confidence up, keep him locked in, and keep him prepared for his opportunity to step up and then play better in future games, because they need this guy to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, injuries have kind of been thrown out there as an excuse, and Broderick has admitted he's got an elbow he's working through, and I think there's, maybe a wrist or a thumb that is also bothering him. But I mean, listen, Chris, he hasn't been on the injury report the first 2 weeks of the season. The Steelers barely acknowledged the elbow injury in training camp. I mean, he didn't miss much time. So I can't sit here and tell you that the injuries are a big issue, because clearly the Steelers don't think that. The one thing I think they can do, and maybe we'll see this in the coming days and weeks, but maybe I understand now he's a swing tackle, so you got to rep right and left, but maybe give the majority of his reps on the left side with Dan Moore in practice. And you're not going to take reps away from Moore, but just put Broderick Jones on the scout team. Let him play scout team left tackle. Let him get his rhythm back on the left side where he spent the majority of his college career. And maybe he can just get some confidence in that, because on some levels, I do think you're right. Keeping him on the right side where you want him to be the left tackle, maybe that's not fair to him. But by the same token, Chris, he's now your swing tackle. So he's got a rep on the right side as well. But maybe just put him on the left more now, let him get comfortable there, and maybe you'll see some results in the future.
I agree with you. I want to step away from the offensive line real quick to talk about George Pickens, because I thought George Pickens, for the most part, got the better of Patrick Surtain in this game. Granted, he only had 2 catches for 29 yards. But when you consider the ones that were taken away by things that were not in George Pickens' control, that man was cooking. He also forced a pass interference on George Pickens. He had a touchdown taken away that I thought – I want to get your thoughts on the call on the pick play, because Gene Steratore came on the broadcast very strongly and said that should not have been a penalty. I looking at it live and looking at the replay, I'm like, if that's a pick play, I've seen the Chiefs currently and the Patriots of the past run that all the time and it not be called.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it was obviously flag happy today. I mean, you see those rub plays. I mean, 50% of the passing plays in the NFL are rub plays in some form or fashion. And the Steelers happened to get called there. I thought it was probably a ticky-tack call, but sometimes you're going to get those, sometimes you're not. The point of that is, Chris, you got to be better. You got to be able to overcome bad calls by the officials. And, the Steelers were able to do that to win the game, but the offense really wasn't able to do that overall. Mike Tomlin talked about that post-game. I think his quote was, "We have to be cleaner." And, he wasn't going to lean on the officiating as an excuse, even if they were a little bit flag happy today. But yeah, I mean, Pickens, the stat sheet doesn't show it, but I agree with you. He was active today. Huge pass interference call that he picked up. I think that was another big chunk play, maybe 25, 30 yards. So overall, it's not going to show up on the stat sheet, but he was definitely a factor in this game today.
But to your point, other receivers are needed. We'll break that down later in the week as we talk to Mike Tomlin on Tuesday and do our Wednesday show here in the North Shore Drive podcast. But I'd be remiss if we didn't talk defense, and that's what we're going to do next, because the defense, for all of the things we're saying about the offense, that they didn't do right. The defense is doing things right. We'll do that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, I remind you, this show is brought to you by Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. They are your mesothelioma and asbestos lawyers with over 85 years of experience. Call them today for a free consultation. That's Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. We're also brought to you by Moon Township Honda, which you can find at 5802 University Boulevard in Moon Township, Pennsylvania, or on their website at moonhonda.com. Here's a message from our friends at Moon Township Honda.
To build the Honda CR-V Hybrid, we took everything you love about the CR-V and kicked it up a notch with greater power for a CR-V unlike any before. Adventure confidently with Honda, car and driver's most awarded brand in 10 best history. The CR-V and CR-V Hybrid, part of the Honda line of rugged vehicles. Visit your local Honda dealer where new vehicles are arriving daily. Buy online or reserve from select Honda dealers.
Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about this defense. We spent a lot of time talking about the offense and how, there's not promising and all this other stuff. Negative talk there in a win. I think this defense continues to show that it can be one of the best in the NFL. In this game, they held the Broncos 2 out of 12 on third downs, held up Bo Nix to just 20 of 35 for 246, 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. They for the most part, they contained the run game. Javonte Williams, their main running back, 11 carries, 17 yards. The most running yards they got was really from Bo Nix, who was using his legs at times. Yeah. Granted, this is not a good offense, and this is not a team that the Steelers defense should struggle with, but they didn't. And I think that's the bottom line, is that in their first 2 games, the Steelers defense has aced the test. Do you think this defense is on a path to be an elite defense, Ray, or do you still have big questions about how they'll play against some better teams?
I think this is going to be a top 5 or top 10 defense, but there are still probably some issues. And I think doing that today when they've given up, 10? They've given up 16 points in the first 2 games. I mean, I got to give them their props, but you did see today Beanie Bishop was targeted a little bit. He struggles. He struggles in short areas. He has a hard time covering receivers sometimes in that intermediate area. Good tackler. He got Bo Nix down on a third down play, but I still think there might be some issues at slot corner. To me, and I wrote about this after the game, Chris, Corey Trice answered some questions about the depth because
he did.
He had to come in for Dante Jackson. Dante Jackson got hurt on that, reverse pass flea flicker, however you want to term it. And Corey Trice came into the game and he made a huge play there. I mean, that kept Denver out of the end zone. It was 10-0 at the time. And listen, if they score a touchdown there, maybe that's a different ball game. But instead, the Steelers go down and kick a field goal. It's 13-0. And then, obviously Denver just didn't have the juice offensively to get back in that football game after that. So, I still have questions about this defense. But, Chris, they're so impressive up front. I mean, Alex Highsmith, TJ Watt today. Cam Hayward's playing awesome again, I think. Still a little bit quiet from the inside linebackers. I don't know if that's a concern yet, but I think overall, I mean, listen, how can you complain? 2-0, 10 points in the opener, 6 points against the
Broncos.
Against the Broncos. I'm blanking out here. It's a really good defense. I think it's only going to get better.
I'm encouraged by the defensive front, how the push that they're getting consistently, and then you see the pressure that TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith are able to get in this game. I haven't been able to see how many pressures they officially got or were tallied for in this game. Both got a sack, though. Both forced Bo Nix up out of the pocket and forced him. Again, you're going to have to use your legs a little bit in this game. And they also, I think, took away some big plays because there were some plays where Bo Nix was under pressure and he misfired or threw away a pass that could have gone to a guy who had decently gotten open deeper down the field. So, but I mean, again, you look at stopping the run, you look at defending the pass, you look at pressuring the quarterback. The Steelers are doing that well, but I also think that you could say the Steelers defensive backs are doing pretty well for the most part. There was like one really big play where I think it was like a 4th and 6 maybe, where I felt like they could have had a better coverage on a slot man. But in general, they seem like an in-position group that's ready to take on whatever you're throwing at them, that looks ready for what most offenses are trying to do.
Yeah, I think they misaligned on that 4th and 6 you're talking about. That just didn't look right from the press box. I know Patrick Queen was up on the line of scrimmage, then he dropped back to the middle and they threw it right down the seam. I thought I think that was a blown coverage, or they were misaligned there. This defense is interesting. A lot of big names, but you look at the stat sheet today, no one really had a great game. I thought they were really thoughtful in how they deployed the defensive backs today. Deshaun Elliott led the team with 9 tackles. He had a huge tackle for loss where he
blew up a run.
3rd and 1. Denver was backed up in their own territory. He drops them. They got a punt. That was early in the football game. But, Minka was filling up the stat sheet as a tackler again. So I thought the defensive backs, especially the safeties, were much more active in the run game today. I don't know if that threw Sean Payton for a loop or not. But, and listen, give KZ credit too, because KZ is the one who got beat by Josh Reynolds on that flea flicker. Just lost track of him. I don't know how he did it. And then he comes back with a game-sealing interception. So, I thought the secondary overall played well today, and that certainly bodes well for the future because, as you mentioned last segment, Justin Herbert's coming to town. He will by far be the best quarterback they've faced so far. Bo Nix is a rookie. He's not very good. Kirk Cousins, obviously a savvy vet, but it's looking like he may be washed a little bit. So they're going to be tested against the Chargers on Sunday. I think we'll have a much better feel for just how good this defense is after that football game.
Complementary football will be very important because even if that defense does come out and play well, I feel like if they give Justin Herbert several extra chances because the offense isn't building on that lead, it's going to turn into a big problem for the Steelers offense moving forward, or Steelers whole team moving forward. But that's why we catalog everything, we journal everything here on the North Shore Drive podcast and in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Ray, thanks so much for joining us here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Get some sleep, brother. We're recording this late Sunday evening. This man has to catch a flight back to Pittsburgh. I'm going to be, by the time you're listening to this, I'm probably going to be talking to Pat Narduzzi after the Pitt's West Virginia win in the backyard brawl. But we'll be talking all things Steelers here all week long. We'll be back Wednesday after Mike Tomlin's Tuesday press conference, letting you know what we're seeing for this upcoming matchup with the Chargers. Are any more changes happening on offense? Will Justin Fields be the starter for Game 3 as Jerry Dulac predicted? We'll get all that here on the North Shore Drive podcast and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you on Wednesday here for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.